What's up, everybody? Welcome to the 2300 Gear Jammer channel. I'm pretty excited. I'm trying to contain myself long enough to get through all the checks we need to do today, but it's almost time to go to the track. And I was going to take the Mustang, but I have changed my mind. I'm going to take the Ranger just because it's low stress, and this will be the first time doing this kind of video at the track, so I think it'll be a good test run. And then once I get that worked out and get a flow for it, then we'll take the Mustang. But for this video, it doesn't really matter. We got a long way to go to get to the track anyway. We are going to check this Ranger top to bottom and go through any safety things that would keep it from going to the drag strip. And this is geared towards anybody who's never been, so you don't really know what to expect. And some of this will apply if you're going to the dyno too. I'll just point those out as we get to those things. So it's a few small things that might be a little bit different as we get there. But for now, we'll check safety stuff, and I don't usually mess around with safety stuff, but we'll start at the ground level, work our way up. You'll find some extra stuff along the way that could definitely be fixed and could be better. I'm probably going to leave it, and we'll just see if it sets the truck on fire or see what happens with it. It'll be a good example of, if you think I should fix it, put it in the comments, and then you can look back and say you were right later if it ends up ruining our day at the track. But for now, let's get into this thing. We'll go from the floor up, see what we find. Here we go. All right, first up, the only thing that really matters, steering and tires and wheels. And check your steering components, just make sure stuff's tight. And wheels and tires, this is all gonna be stock stuff on the Ranger, but I treat them the same. I'm gonna air the fronts up all that you can fit in them, and just to the point of safety squints, and then make sure the pressure is the same both sides, and check all the lug nuts. But on the back, I actually start with the tires pumped up pretty tight, and I'll pick sort of a high pressure like these. I'll probably start 27, 28 PSI to begin with, and then I'll drop it to 25. But I want to get a pass or two just like it sits, and then I'll decide if it's the tire pressure that's too high, or if I need to leave it a lower RPM or work the clutch a little bit harder. We'll just get some passes under it before I worry about it. And that gives me the chance to just let air out of the tires. It's really easy to let air out. It's not as easy to put it back. So I start with the too high and just drive around it to begin with to get a feel for it. Lug nuts, the only thing that's different on these, this is just a normal closed lug nut. Standard studs, make sure they're tight and everything will be fine on those. Looking at the truck, nobody's ever gonna say anything. When you're running slicks though, you end up with a really long stud. And the reason they do that is they want to see the stud sticking out of the lug nut for this style. And the Ranger is going to be running slicks, but it's on the same wheel. So I don't recommend doing that. We're going to run stock studs and stock lug nuts. I've done it for a long time. If that ends up being a problem, that can be one of the I told you so things. So I would recommend a good wheel stud if you're going to be doing anything with slicks. But that's it for that. Next, I'm gonna jack up the front left and pull the wheel off. I already know there's a problem with the brakes. I saw it when I was doing the transmission the other day. There's definitely an issue we need to fix. So let me get the wheel off and I'll show you what's wrong there. All right, so this is not supposed to be out like that. This is supposed to be in here. So what happens is these things lose their ability to hang on to the caliper bracket. They just knock in and then wedge themselves in there. But jumping up the hill and all the other dumb stuff I do with this truck definitely knocks them loose. I saw this when I was doing the transmission the other day, so I will tap this back into place and then the brakes look fine from there. Tappy tappy. In general, that's it for the brakes. Just make sure nothing's leaking and check the master cylinder to make sure you've got fluid. Rear brakes depends on whether you're running disc or drum. And these are drum, and I have them apart every now and then, so I keep an eye on them. Everything in the rear of this is brand new, so not gonna worry about that too much. That pretty much covers it for stuff on the ground. Next is just general body stuff. So go through, and when I did the fuel tank, I cleaned the bed out really good and pressure washed it. Make sure there's no trash. Looks like trash. And this truck's got a toolbox, which is super cool. Might want to clean a little bit of this out. The mice are going to be upset. And I love this toolbox, but oh no, I never noticed that. Jeez, this thing's about totaled. Anyway, so I'll probably fix that think they had a wood screw in it. Oh, yeah. All right, well, that goes right there. Stay. And the same goes for the inside. Clean, yikes. Make sure there's nothing in the yikes. All right, we got a little ways to go. So I'm gonna clean out everything in the toolbox and inside the truck. And I think there's probably 20 or 30 pounds worth of junk in there. So let's go under the hood, and that one's gonna take a minute, I think. So let's go there. All right, under hood stuff, really the only thing that matters is the radiator and coolant and hoses more than anything. So I don't run any antifreeze. That does get me in trouble. That was the whole point of the freeze plug disappearing, is because I run straight water. And the reason I run straight water is because when it goes to the track, if something happens, if you run over water, it's a little slick. If you run over antifreeze on the track, it is like ice. So more than anything, I don't care so much about this truck. I don't want to put antifreeze down for somebody else. And this is, you know, these things will blow head gaskets and push water out. So I run straight water and good hoses, no exception. And the radiator is a brand new one for an Explorer, but yeah, I don't really like that either. I may put a solid radiator in this at some point, but for now, cheap as possible. And these things are really bad about the caps breaking off. So I went to the junkyard yesterday and I got a new cap for the reservoir, and I can at least say I fixed something on it. That'll slow it down when the head gasket busts and it pushes all the water out. There. All right, we fixed something at least. All right, timeout. Cooling system is definitely one of the things that can go either way. You need a whole lot more cooling system if you're going to the dyno. So you're running higher RPMs. It's maintaining a set RPM. It's maintaining, trying to make power best it can. And you don't have air moving across the entire vehicle. So usually there's a huge fan in front of the radiator for going to the dyno. But at the drag strip, you can use a really small radiator, especially if you're not somewhere that's extremely hot. I mean, we're in South Carolina, so it gets fairly warm down here, but you can get away with a whole lot less radiator at the drag strip than you would trying to run at the dyno. So this thing's got a mechanical fan. It doesn't even have an electric fan. I'll probably put that on it at some point. The Mustang and the Pinto have an electric fan and electric water pump. So when you make a track pass, you can just run those and it'll cool the engine right off. I did just have to put a thermostat in the Ranger. It was stuck like halfway between stuck open and closed. So I put that in it. Oops. And then I filled it up with some really, really good puddle water from out back. That'll work. Oops. 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 So now it's good to go. All right. And I think the number two thing after the cooling system that people miss, that you just don't really think about until something terrible happens, on these kind of vehicles is the power steering cap that goes in. And what happens is the seal that goes around the cap, it gets loose in the housing, and either these tabs will break off or it'll get hot and swell, and then the cap will fly out. And man, that stuff makes a mess too. So that's a really common thing. You can get these at any parts store in the help section just for a couple of bucks. So I put one in the Ranger before we got started because this one was getting kind of sloppy. So I did that. So cooling system first, power steering second. And then really it gets down to how much time do you want to spend getting ready for the track, or do you just want to go and see what it runs? So we're to the point where we're going to go and see what it runs. There's not much else safety stuff other than leaking oil. So check and see if it's leaking oil. It's leaking oil. Put some in it. We're good. I already pressure washed this thing. I did that in the other video. I should have mentioned that earlier. Is I pressure washed all the junk to get it off of the truck. So if I go play in the mud, I clean the thing before I take it to the track and ruin somebody's nice track prep. Somebody asked about the coil mounting on this because in the factory location, I think the coils sit kind of in this general area where the tube goes through. So it makes sort of a mess to get stuff through. I prefer coils sitting on that side or somewhere in the middle. Because this intake is over the valve cover, it's sitting in the spot I would typically have the coil mounted. This one, because I care so much, if you look, there's no heat protection on the plug wires, and the coil is very permanently mounted. I'll zip tie it to something before I go. That's the best I'm gonna do. We're just gonna see what happens. Worst case, there's a lot of worst case scenarios with this truck, but I think worst case for ignition system, one of the worst cases is a plug wire will land on the exhaust manifold because they'll hang a little bit lower when it gets hot. But that's, I mean, that kind of thing would almost never happen in this truck. Outside of that, I'm just looking at anything that's electrical that could end up on something hot, exhaust manifold, turbo, those things. I do have a turbo blanket for this. I probably will run that just for, if we're gonna hot lap it and go a bunch of times in a row, I'll probably put a turbo blanket on it. I've run it with and without, doesn't seem to matter too much, but. And the other thing that I have broken quite a few of is fittings that run for the oil feed line. Either things get set down, or when they get hot, they get a little over torqued, or whatever's happened. Every now and then I'll lose an oil feed line fitting and it'll spray oil everywhere. So just make sure that kind of stuff, pressurized oil, isn't leaking. And it'll be pretty obvious, because if you have, yeah, like that. If you have pressurized oil that's leaking, it'll come out pretty fast and it'll go everywhere that's hot and it will catch on fire. See fire picture. It's a lot of jokes about this Ranger catching on fire. Must be because I don't care too much. Anyway, so that's the gist of it. That's all the engine stuff. And same thing, check all the fluids. And it's not a whole lot you can check on this as far as clutch things, but check the bolts that go in the drive shaft. So the drive shaft that's in these, the drive shaft would be this way, and then this piece is in the rear end. So these flat flanges, it's pretty rare that I've had it happen with street tires, but on slicks, these will every now and then shake loose. So if you rattle the tire just a little bit, or you come out of the burnout box and it grips real hard, it can knock these loose every now and then. So the Ranger is about the last thing that still uses this. So you take a 12 millimeter, 12 point, and you're good to go if you need to tighten them up. I always check those before I go. Even if it's something that I've been driving, I'll still check those on this one. So next up is the intercooler tubing. We're getting farther away from safety stuff and more towards the things that will ruin your day. And these are on pretty good. This truck runs low boost, so it's never really had an issue. I have blown some intercooler tubes off of everything though. It happens. So just check them. I usually don't set them in place without tightening them, but if I'm in a hurry and I just set something in place and say I'll tighten it when I come back, I miss it. So it's an easy thing. Just check them all. If you've had any of it apart, just run over them real quick. Check all your clamps. And what else? I thought of another safety thing. The battery hold down is pretty important. You want to make sure your battery's in there tight. Because what will happen is if you launch and the front end comes up or bounces, it can get into the hood and then you have a fire event. So one thing I just set this battery in the other day, so I will actually tighten this down so the battery doesn't fall out. That's pretty much it for the general covering the truck. Let's go through some of the tools that I take and how I decide what to take to the track as far as tools. That's kind of tricky because you don't really know what you need as far as tools or spare parts or anything. So let's cover some tools. All right, it's sort of tricky trying to figure out what tools you need to take. I like taking the least amount of stuff possible. If you notice, a lot of what I do is just hand tools when I'm working on this stuff. So I keep it as simple as possible. That way, if I go to the track, I can just take it with me. And I've got a wrench set that's pretty much everything you need. All right, if it's not in that set, I've got another small cardboard box that I keep handy when I'm working on one of these vehicles, and I'll throw specialty tools in that. And that box grows over time too, so I don't want to take too much, but you start out with a small box and it gets a little bit bigger because you think you need something else. And then it gets a little bit bigger because you think you need something else some other day. And then by the time you get done, like when I run the Mustang, I will just roll out everything I've got plus the kitchen sink and we'll take that to the track. And that's the benefit of having the big trailer. Other than small hand tools, tire pressure gauge is probably the one thing that everybody forgets. I always take it with me and just lose it somewhere in the vehicle on the way. The best advice I've ever been given, it was actually the fellow that sent us the fuel pump for this. He said, always have extra tire pressure gauges. Not for you, but so the Mustang, I run 12 PSI. It's 11 to 12 PSI on those tires. I have a gauge that lives with that car. It only works at 11 to 12 PSI. That's the only thing those tires ever see. This truck, is a lot higher. It's 20 to 30 psi, so I've got a gauge that I typically use about 25 psi. And then I carry a third one that is to be loaned out to somebody. So if you forget your tire pressure gauge and you just walk up to some random person and they don't loan you theirs, don't get mad. There's a good reason for that. If they do loan you theirs, be suspect of it, because people will hand you stuff that doesn't work. So anyway, so a tire pressure gauge and some way to check on the lugs. I prefer a big breaker bar with a socket on it, but a 4-way lug wrench, something like that, so you can check that. That's pretty much it. This doesn't take a whole lot for tools, so keep it pretty minimal. All right, I rank transportation to and from the track pretty high importance. I'm going to be taking my big trailer for a couple of reasons. One, I don't have tags and insurance on all these vehicles. I have a bunch of stuff sitting here, so I'm going to take the trailer. And two, there's a good chance it's going to die at some point, so I like being able to get home with the junk. I just did new vents on top of the trailer and a new winch. I have a feeling the winch is going to get used pretty quick, but we'll see. If you don't have any body at all, just do your best to try to make checklists and at least find somebody with a backup plan. Tell them hopefully you don't need them, but at least find somebody that's got a trailer just in case that can come get you. Mentally it helps you relax if you know you got a way home. Don't worry about driving it though. I have driven stuff many states away, ran it on nitrous and turned around and drove it home. So don't worry about that. You're taking a chance when you do it, but that's all of everything that we're doing is taking chances, so it's okay. But transportation is pretty important. All right, spare parts. This thing's pretty stock, so it doesn't need a whole lot. It needs everything. It's gonna need everything by the time we get done. But I'm gonna take a spare silicone coupler and just for the intercooler, and I'll take an ignition module with the tool to change it out. You should probably have that in your vehicle, whether it's a 8-plug or 4-plug cylinder head. You ought to have the ignition module with you always. I'll probably take a gallon of water. You don't even necessarily have to take a gallon of water. If you just want to travel light, you can just take a jug. Usually you can find running water at the track somewhere. I did see an online deal for something, so I just put all of them in my cart and just cleared out the warehouse for what they had. So that's always extremely important when you're working with a 2.3. Outside of that, we may take a couple extra fire extinguishers, but that's pretty much it. We're going to travel light with this one. Like I said, when I take these, we're going to take quite a few extra parts probably, but we're traveling simple for the Ranger. This thing runs in like the 15s-ish in the quarter, so 9s in the 1/8, 15s in the quarter. That's sort of where it's always been. I've set the goal for 8s in the 1/8, so somewhere in the mid-14s range in the quarter mile. And when you're running that kind of time, you don't get into a whole lot of safety stuff. So you can run stock seat belts. You don't have to have a drive shaft loop, but some places, if you're running slicks, you do. So just know that that's a thing that exists. The Mustang and the Pinto kind of have a built-in drive shaft loop the way the underneath of the car is set up. So this truck doesn't have anything for that. We're just going to go as is. And when I get to the next step, which is mid to low 7s, is the point you start needing a lot of the safety stuff, I will cover that. And we're going to do that on the Pinto. So I'll do this video again with the next level. As the Pinto gets to that point, we'll cover that. And then the Black Mustang is set up to go 850. All of the safety stuff is good to go 850s in the quarter, which is 539 in the 1/8. The car will never run that, but it's at least certified up to that point. I'll do a video for that for all the steps. It's a lot more involved in that one. And then there's yearly, and every other year you got to update stuff, and it's a whole lot more expensive to do that. This one's pretty simple, so I'm gonna leave this one here. And hopefully, I'm not sure depending on weather, but hopefully the next video is going to be us taking this Ranger to the track. So put in the comments what you saw that you think is going to be a problem, and we'll catch you on the next one. Thanks for watching. Bye.